Welcome to Ring of Fire.
I'm Alex Barr, doula and educator.
And I'm Emmy the Birth Wizard.
This is where we talk about the tough moments of birth work
and help you transition into fire starters. This computer.
Got it.
What if I hit leave meeting the second it says to me zero started? I gotta get out of here.
Wait, it's here. A podcast we're recording? No, I can't do that. Goodbye.
Wait a minute. We were just hanging out.
Right.
Welcome to our sorry, I was gonna digress already. I got asked to be on someone else's podcast, and I was really excited about it. And someone was like, "Why are you so excited? You have your own podcast." And I was like, "Yeah, I have my own podcast because I want to listen to myself speak." But now, like, somebody else wants me to speak. Someone else wants to listen to me.
Yeah, it's not just me.
I literally just keep making podcasts with people because I'm like, I like hearing them talk. How can I get them to talk to me more often?
That's the only way that Emmy makes friends.
Literally.
Let's start a podcast.
I trap so many people, though, into relationships with me where I'm like, hello, you seem interesting.
Let's hang out weekly.
Everything has to be a professional relationship. It can't just be like a casual. You're like, no, we're in business together now. Sign this contract.
I own your ass.
It's so funny by how accurate that is of any friendship.
She just has to brand every friendship. Like, you can't just, there's got to be a logo and there has to be a slogan. And
otherwise we can't hang out together.
No.
It's not every single one of them, but it's pretty close. It's a lot. The fact that my husband hasn't let me start a podcast with the two of us is really disappointing, honestly. So
Cam has tried many times to get me to start a podcast with him.
So I started one with him.
True.
Yeah, that's funny.
All right, welcome to Ring of Fire.
Yeah,
I said Ring of Fire.
Wing.
We'll try again. Welcome to Ring of Fire.
Oh, one at a time.
Let's make Monica say welcome to Ring of Fire.
Oh, yes. Let's do that.
Welcome to Ring of Fire.
I'm Emmy the Birth Wizard.
That immediately interrupts me. I'm trying to do the intro to your podcast.
All right, try again. We'll let Monica stop talking before we finish. We gotta do this. Pay attention to the Zoom lag. You gotta get used to it. You know, it happens.
Right. Welcome to Ring of Fire. This is the podcast where we talk about doula stuff. I'm Monica.
And I'm Alex Barr, doula and educator.
And I'm Emmy the Birth Wizard.
And Monica didn't tell us who she was.
It's the mystery. I'm Monica. I'm a labor and delivery nurse. I'm a certified childbirth educator and a certified birth doula. And Alex and Emmy asked me to be on their podcast. And so here I am.
Yeah.
We're excited to have you.
We're super excited to have you. Honestly, we're all pals anyway, outside of this realm of work. But we felt that Monica would be a great person to talk to because I found, and Alex finds as well, on those like doula boards or even talking to other doulas, and I know you have too when you were on the other side of the coin, Monica, of like so much talk about us trying to figure out what nurses are thinking or what they like feel about us, or am I doing my job right? Am I pissing off a nurse? Like what's the vibes? Like how do I do the things with nurses? And Alex and I were like, we know a nurse who's also a doula. We should just talk to them. And we want to put out the, like, what's the word? It starts with a D.
Disclaimer.
Disclaimer. Thank you. Hell yeah. That this is just Monica's opinions and ideas and things. And you guys should make friends with your own local nurses to see what they think and feel. Because this is just one perspective. But we think it's a pretty cool perspective. So Monica, if you could tell us like how you became a labor and delivery nurse along with like a childbirth educator and a doula.
Yeah, so I actually went to nursing school specifically to become a labor and delivery nurse. It's something I've been wanting to do my whole life. I didn't know when I was little what a labor and delivery nurse was, but I used to make my mom pretend to give birth so that I could pretend to deliver her babies. And so here we are. Right out of nursing school, I worked on a labor and delivery unit, and I worked there for a few months. And where I worked was very high risk. Birth was always medicalized. I'd never actually seen an unmedicated delivery, an unmedicated birth before. And it was a really intense, high level of care, high level of acuity. Um, and my unit wasn't really prepared to have a new grad nurse on board. So I didn't have the greatest experience. And it honestly made me think maybe I shouldn't even be a labor and delivery nurse. Maybe it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. So I left and I ended up working for a law firm for a little while, reviewing medical malpractice cases. So I would review actually a lot of like fetal monitoring strips and tell lawyers whether or not they might have a good case if there was some sort of birth related injury.
Wow,
Um,
that's heavy.
yeah, it was really interesting and horrible and ultimately soul sucking. It was a really cushy job, but it wasn't fulfilling at all. But I did learn a lot, and I still value the knowledge that I kind of took with me from that. Um, but yeah, so I did that for a while, and I was just really missing being in the birth world. It's just something that like never really left me. I was always thinking about it. I was still listening to podcasts about it. I was still, doing research about it and thinking, how could I get back into it? And we moved out to Arizona for my spouse's job. And at that point, I was thinking, I had heard about doulas and childbirth educators. And I thought to myself, well, if I don't want to be a nurse at the bedside, maybe I could re enter the birth world in this way. And so I did. And I opened my own business.
When you were originally a nurse in your first location, um, did you run into doulas there, or were they not really on the floor?
We had in the time I was there, which was, let's say, about 6 months total,
Mm-hmm.
one doula, and
One.
not received very well. The patient
Mm.
ended up having a C-section, which is not a failure of any kind, but
That's
the
plenty of
nurses,
babies are born that way.
of course, but the nurses were like, well, of course she had a C-section. She brought a doula with her. She had a birth plan. It was that vibe. It was terrible.
Oh, I
It
see.
was it was harsh.
It
So,
happened because because the birther was planning and
right.
wanting something different.
Yeah,
So
like
she jinxed
exactly.
herself. They jinxed
Yes.
themselves. Interesting. Okay.
And
Yeah.
I've heard that before.
Mhm. Yeah. So, and it's still, I mean, honestly, you still hear that every now and then. Like, even where I work, sometimes people will be like, well, of course she did that. She had a birth plan. So, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, that's not, anyway, but that's rare that I hear that now. Back then, that's like, was the consensus of the unit where I worked before. So, that was my only experience with doulas. But we did have a childbirth educator on our unit, and I sat in on one of her classes, and that's what was like. I remember just being so jealous of her job and wanting to be her. Like, I hated my job there, but like I wanted to be her and have that job. So I think that that's what like propelled me into it ultimately, where I was like, oh wait, there's this whole other realm of the birth world.
What part of it were you jealous of her over? I'm curious.
I don't know. I just feel like she didn't have the weight and responsibility of like two lives on her. As a labor and
Mm,
delivery nurse at the bedside, there's a lot of responsibility there and a
yes,
lot
there
of
is.
just, it's very stressful and very, it takes a certain kind of strength to be able to, carry that. And I didn't have it at that time. So it felt very overwhelming. And she just got to enjoy talking about something that she loves and was passionate about and got to help other people understand it better. And I think that's what I was really looking for. And I wanted to understand birth better. And nursing school didn't really prepare me, honestly, for what birth actually is.
Oh, interesting. What are 3 things you learned as a childbirth educator that you didn't know as a nurse?
Oh gosh, I feel like so there it just helped me put the pieces together. Like as a nurse, like
Ah,
we learn about like all these interventions and blah blah blah, and we don't always have time in class or in orientation to understand why, like why things are happening the way they are, and like the not medical part of it where it's just, that's just nature, that's just like how your body works, you know what I mean? It helped me put the pieces together
Okay.
rather than like, because I already knew all the little individual things, but it really helped me connect the dots. Like, why do people bleed after they deliver a baby? Like, I didn't understand why they were bleeding, so I didn't understand why we were doing the things to stop the bleeding.
Yeah.
But now I understand, like, I don't know, because now
So
I know how to explain it to them.
so nursing essentially taught you reactionary to birth,
Yeah,
whereas being a childbirth educator taught you how to be in the moment with
yeah,
birth.
totally.
Interesting.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah. It made me less afraid of it. I think I was really fearful of it because I didn't quite understand what
Why
was
it
going on.
happened or what the like purpose of it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that's a lot of people, even those who become doulas first and get exposed to birth, right? Of like, whoa, no one's told me that's how it was gonna go, right?
Whenever doulas take my childbirth class, because I've had a couple, I'm always shocked at how much they learn. I'm always like, you probably know all of this.
Mhm.
And they're like, I didn't know most of it. Like, oh my gosh, I learned so many things. So it is something that like, I'm like, oh, so there, I am filling in these gaps, even for birth workers, even for people who are around birth. Like,
Mhm.
so.
Yeah.
So you decide after leaving and coming to this new place, you're gonna become a doula and a childbirth educator. Uh, was there a big search for who you were gonna go through? Like, what was that journey like for you? Like establishing all of that?
Yeah, there actually was a big search. And even before I moved out here, I was looking at different training organizations and I kind of compared them all. And ultimately, I ended up going with one that didn't require certifying birth. I
Okay.
went with Best Doula training and I really enjoyed them. Um, but yeah, they didn't require certifying birth. I figured, I've already been in a birth space, like I've been in the birth space,
Right.
I've been in labor and delivery, you know what I mean? So it wasn't that I needed to experience that. I needed to just understand how to support people in labor a little bit better too. So, and they were really well rounded. They did a lot of, like we talked about diversity. It wasn't just like a whitewashed version of a doula training. It felt very like we're here for everybody. It wasn't just like, oh, women this and women that. Like they were very inclusive, and that was the vibe that I was going for as well.
Gotcha.
So what was your experience as a doula?
Mhm.
How is it different from being a nurse? How did it propel you back into nursing?
I enjoyed being a doula. I did not enjoy being on call all the time. Um,
It's a rough gig, man.
yes. But I also felt like I it was hard to kind of toe the line of I have this knowledge and these responsibilities as a nurse, but I have to kind of abandon some of that in order to be this person's doula. And I have to draw that line very clearly with them. So that was a little bit stressful having to be like, yep, I am a nurse and I have all of this, but I'm not your nurse. And
Mm.
yeah, and it was something I specifically had to put in my contract and just be very like wary of, because I think that it was useful, right? That I had this like knowledge as a nurse, but it wasn't what I was marketing. You know what I mean?
Right.
So as much as I wanted to use that and be like, look at all of this, I have all of this knowledge, I had to pull back on it because I didn't want people to get the wrong idea, you know?
I think it's interesting that you still had to have essentially a scope conversation.
Hmm. Yeah. Even though like, yeah, it's just weird because doulas technically don't even like doulas are doulas, right? I mean, we talk about doulas scope of practice, but there's no real scope because it's not, you know what I mean?
Right.
So
No,
yeah,
exactly.
right. But I had to draw one for myself, even though it made me uncomfortable to do it.
Yeah.
That's a conversation we've had before on this podcast, that you're essentially drawing your own scope of practice and what you're willing to operate within.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah.
And
But
but as a nurse, I feel that you would be able to step so far out of your scope as a doula because you have so much knowledge and understanding of this other side of it. Whereas like I can't. I don't understand the medical side of it. Like I can only, even if I'm stepping outside of my scope or doing something that's crossing a boundary, I still can't go that far because
Yeah.
I can't read a fetal monitoring strip. I can't like, like stuff like that where it's like, I can't go too far kind of thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it was hard like in a hospital setting because I didn't actually do any home birth. I only worked in the hospital setting because that's where I was comfortable and that's why people would hire me, right? Because I did have that knowledge. But it was even harder because I had to kind of shut off that part of my brain where like I could clearly see the fetal monitor above me, but that's not my job right now. Like my job isn't to, because even if I see something, I can't, you know what I mean? So it made it harder. I also didn't want any of the nurses or the doctors to know that I was also a labor nurse at one point. I just didn't want any, you guys know, like how it can be hard to navigate those relationships with the rest of the care team. I didn't want anyone thinking I was stepping on people's toes or that I thought I knew best or that I was whispering in my client's ear. Like, I just didn't want, even though I was having conversations with my client about,
all of that. Yeah.
all of the things, I didn't want people to think, oh, it's because she's a nurse. She thinks that she's better. She knows more than we do or whatever.
I understand. I think
it is a complicated relationship, right? And that's
yeah.
why we wanted to have you on the podcast, because I feel like that's such a big topic, right? Talking about like what is our relationship with nurses and how do we talk to them and what happens if they don't like you and stuff like that.
Yeah. And it's funny because like I've been there, but like I'm also that person. So it's just like all intertwined.
Did you find any sort of treatment while you were a doula that you were like, oh, that was a little uncool, or anything that you witnessed where you're like, oh, that's what my like fellow doulas are talking about? Like, did you get to see nurses from that other side too?
Not necessarily, because the people that I was a doula for had babies before. And so I know that you guys like maybe know this, but it's the whole different experience, like with someone who's had babies than with someone who's their first baby. The timeline is so much different. Like you're showing up later in the game just because that's when all the things are happening, but it goes a lot faster normally. And so I didn't spend as much time, I don't think, as a lot of doulas do with like first time parents, you know what I mean? I just feel like it was a different, and then the people who it was their first baby, I didn't actually end up getting to go to their deliveries because I needed to use you guys. So
right.
Oh my goodness. But yeah, no, so I never actually experienced a nurse who I never butted heads with the nurse. I never saw like, oh, this nurse like is doing questionable things, but I did see like the usual, like, oh, like the doctor's going to come and they're going to break your water. And then the nurse would leave and I'd say, hey, like, are you okay with that? Like she said it as a statement, but do you, you know what I mean? Like we'd have those conversations, but it wasn't as intense as like
some of the stuff.
Well, and so were you having those conversations after nurses left the room? Was that, is that like, was your vibe?
Yeah, totally.
That's typically what I do. Right. So that's always a conversation of like, I'll typically wait till they leave so that it's like making sure that you're comfortable and like my client's comfortable answering those questions honestly, right? Because having a nurse or somebody else in the room puts this pressure and like this power imbalance, right? Of like, oh, do I have to say yes to this? Do I have to like, can I ask more questions? That kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think that like, that was my vibe, was waiting for the like people to walk out and then having a conversation. But I also think that like something as a nurse that I appreciate when doulas do, and this might not go for all nurses, but for me personally as a nurse, I like it when the doula actually talks to me, like actually says something, like says, hey, wait, actually, like, can you stay for a second? Because I have a question, or you know what I mean? When doulas collaborate with me directly, it makes me feel really good because I'm like, okay, this person knows this patient better than I will ever know them because they've spent so much more time with them. So I'd like to hear from you too, you know.
I try to balance it, right? Like if it's something where I feel like I know my client's not going to answer honestly or be uncomfortable with, I'll wait. If it's something that like I've run into a lot of times where clients will ask me questions and I'm like, I'm not sure, let's ask the nurse when she's in here or when they're in here, and they'll just like be quiet as the nurse is there.
I get
I
that.
have to do the like, actually, we have a question about, whatever.
Yeah. And I think that, like, some nurses will just be like, oh, well, she just said that she didn't have any questions, so I'm just going to be on my way. And
Yeah.
then, but I personally like can feel it when something is off, or like I'm very sensitive to the fact that people are very shy in front of healthcare providers sometimes. So
Yeah.
I pry really hard. Actually, I'm like, tell me what's wrong, what's happening, what's like, I'm
What's the
very much
deal?
like, we have to talk because
What did I just
need,
walk into?
yes, like, or I'll walk in and the patient's very tearful and I'm like, why are we crying? What's going on? We gotta talk. Like, we can't just, exactly, because they're just scared or like nervous. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
so
and
I
I'd love to know what you think, where the like butting heads of like doulas and nurses like comes from. Because at least from what I've seen, nurses aren't like acting the same way towards like mother-in-law that's in the room, or partners, or things like that.
yeah, I don't know. I feel like it depends on I don't know. I feel like the personalities can sometimes clash, but also
Yeah.
I think in terms of like, I just said I never wanted nurses to think that I was whispering in my patient's ear. And that's why my patient or my client was saying something to the nurse. You know what I mean? Like I really wanted them to know that we were all like collaborating on the same team. And like as a nurse, that's how I want to feel too. I think that like the butting heads comes in when we feel like the doula is taking control of the situation and not actually acting in the patient's best interest. You know what I mean? Where they have their own kind of agenda of like how they would like the
Would
birth to go.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? I think that that's the only time where it really gets bad, where I'm like, it feels like we're not on the same team.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's fair.
Or they're walking in with like, hospital is the enemy mindset, right? Because I see that so much, right? Where it's like, everybody here is bad and everything that's going to happen here is bad, right? So like, I need a doula to protect me from it, kind of thing.
Right.
I make a point of always introducing myself when I come into the room. I always make a point of like being like so overtly like friendly to the point where it's almost obnoxious, because I want to make sure that it's very clear, like, no, you do that. You're here for medical stuff. I'm here to hold things, pick things up. You want me to run to get water? I'm here to do that. Whatever you want, babes, right? Like, and I'm always that level when I come in with nurses. But in the case of like that particular nurse, after I've done all those things and I've like created that feeling of like, we're here to collaborate. If you come at my client with the doctor's going to come in and pop water, see you in 3. And it's like, hey, come back here. Come on, we're pals. Can we phrase that differently? Or is this up for discussion? Or like, can we be real for a sec? Come on, friend. Right. And I have gotten better success because I start out with such a friendly vibe that in those moments where I have to call them out on language that probably wasn't appropriate, or like maybe calls where I'm like, hey, maybe we have this discussion, they're a little bit more forthright about it. But it's probably because I've done so much work ahead of time that now that we're here, they're like, all right, I guess we could have this discussion. Right. So
yeah, I think that's absolutely like spot on. I think that like if I don't know, I think some people just come into the room or the hospital as like this place was not our goal, like especially if it wasn't the goal to deliver in the hospital. But it's a sensitive situation, which I am very attuned to. Not all nurses are attuned to that sensitive situation, and you know what I mean? But like I feel like I am, but so I think that giving the nurses the benefit of the doubt and not immediately being like, these people are out to, just do all the interventions. And I think also the demonizing of all intervention can be really harmful in terms of the relationship between the doula and the nurse, because ultimately, like, the nurses are patient advocates. We are here to keep the baby and the birther safe, but we also are answering to doctors and our charge nurse and hospital policy. And so I think that like giving us the benefit of the doubt, where it's like, you know, if we're open and collaborative, we can kind of work to find a happy medium. But sometimes we are offering these things because it's not our idea. You know what I mean? We're like,
Right.
this came, it's like a trickle down effect, and we're here like presenting you with the option that was given to us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and it's which we've talked about before, where it's like, you know, you're yelling at the person or upset with the person who's like at the lowest rung, right?
yeah.
Like you're screaming at the cashier for the policy of the place, right? Not really necessary, right? Like if you need to talk to someone above that level, go do it. If you need to talk to a charge nurse, right? Do it. If you need to call in a patient advocate, you can do that, right? Like it doesn't have to be like nurse is the enemy, right? You can even ask for another nurse, right? There are other options if a nurse is not like vibing with your client in that birth, right? But the demonizing of interventions is spot on, because there's no conversation about how this intervention could prevent further interventions, right? Like that's
Right.
sometimes the case, right?
Or
Yeah.
stay the fuck out of it, doula. It's not your fucking birth. And if your birther's cool with that intervention, shut the fuck up. Sorry, y'all. I'm literally talking straight to you. I want that to like kind of send shivers down your spine. Like, really check yourself in those moments where your birther has been educated on all the choice, like understands what's going to happen or not happen, and they say yes. You sit down. You sit down.
I'm never upset at that point. If you've been educated and you consent to it, I'm like, fuck yeah, let's do the epidural. Let's do the thing. Let's do the Pitocin, right? Like if you're for sure, like, yes, this is what I want to do. Fuck yeah. I've had a
Yeah.
client be like, it's C-section time, right? Like I'm done, right? And the nurse is like, yeah. She's like, cool, let's go. Right? I'm
Do
like,
it.
I'm not going to be sad about that, right? The client was ready for that. The client was at that point. The client was like not was only going to suffer if we prolonged it, right? How can I be mad at that? How can I look at that as like a failure or a disappointment for me as a doula?
Yeah.
I didn't
No,
wedge the baby in her pelvis the wrong way. Like it wasn't my doing. I didn't fail it like that, right? I didn't make the epidurals not work twice for this particular client. Like I didn't do that, right? I supported her as she went through it, but why would I be mad at those interventions or those extra things if the client was prepared for that and ready for that, you know?
Yeah, I think that's the thing too, where it's like doulas can kind of, and I say this because I'm guilty of it as a labor nurse too, taking too much taking any real ownership of a birth outcome. Like
That
because
one.
if
Yes.
you as a doula or as a labor nurse or whatever are saying, well, this birth outcome was the direct effect of what I did, like I feel like you're just giving yourself too much credit. You know what I mean? Like because there's only so much
Yes.
we have
Yes.
control over.
Yes.
You know, like I can go to work and I can be the best labor nurse in the whole world and I can do all the position changes and I can do all of the things, and that baby could still be OP and we still go for a C-section. Like,
Yeah.
and that's nothing to do, that's just how it is. You
Yeah.
know, unless you're directly like negligent or committing or doing something completely wrong, I think that, you know, you can't put all of that on yourself. You just got to free yourself from that, because
Yeah.
and it goes both ways, right? Like you can't take direct ownership of, wow, my client had a successful home birth, that must have been all because of me.
Well, and
What?
that's just it. And I think that's really where that mindset comes from, is I'm here making sure successful, quotation marks, whatever the fuck that means to that person, birth is. It's because of my education, it's because of my knowledge, it's because of me being there and like all of this. And it's like, dude, did you forget about how they went to like chiropractic care for the last 9 months, and also they got a childbirth educator, and then they also like did all this shit of and also did the baby cooperated in just the way that they needed to, and like
And the client chose a provider that vibed with their goals and
right.
the values matched up. And it's
Exactly.
yeah, I think that like my goal is for a safety. My goal is safety at work. And if that ends up happening, then I feel like I did my job. But outside of that, I'm like, I can't control there's only so much in my control, you know? But I
Yeah.
think we all need to
My
remember
only
that.
goal is how my client feels afterwards, right?
Mhm.
But I think that
You know?
speaks to both of your roles in the room, right? Like
Yeah.
doula's goals should be around clients' feelings and processing and all of that. And nurses' goals are around medical safety. That's why we stay in the scopes that
Ultimately.
we're in, right? So it makes sense that you both would have different answers of like what my goal is here, right?
Yeah.
And
So
that's of course like the bare minimum, right? Like I try my best to do all the things, but if at the
yes,
end of the day, like all I could muster was the safety aspects, then we did it, right? Like if all you can muster is my client was supported physically and mentally through that birth, like that's what your job was and you did it. And we go on to another day, you know?
for
Yeah.
sure. As now a nurse who is a doula and a childbirth educator, did it change how you were a nurse the second time around? Like, do you find that there's any impacts of like what you learned into now?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you know, we just talked about like how I was so scared and fearful of birth, and then I learned how to be a childbirth educator. Like I got the education that I could then use to educate my patients. And I feel like that changed everything for me. Like just personally receiving that education, I was like, oh, okay. And now I can kind of use my intuition more than just my textbook knowledge. And I think that that's a real gift. And that's like how I like to practice nursing is with a lot of intuition and a lot of like the more holistic care than just like, well, I learned it this way, and so I'm going to just do it this way, and that's just how it is. Um, but I feel like I also understand more about like trauma that can come from a birth experience or be triggered by a birth experience because that was part of my doula training. Um, and I really carry it with me, and it's really come up actually a lot in, you know, the time that I've been working now again as labor nurse. Um, I think that like trauma informed care, like being at the center of what I do, has really helped me like provide better care. When I was brand new, I didn't know anything about that. I had no idea. And so I knew something was wrong. Like I knew that like I should be doing more based in consent and doing more to educate my patients, but I didn't have that ability. And so I would go home and be like, did they even know what was happening to them? Like, did they even know what happened? Because did they even have a good experience? Like, I would just be like, I don't know if I even took care of them. You know what I mean? I did all my tasks, but and now I go home and I'm like, okay, I did the whole thing.
I'm sure
Yeah.
it feels like you're doing like a childbirth class every day, just in different chunks.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel like a lot of nurses realize those gaps if they're not getting that training? Like, do you think they realize like, oh, maybe there is something missing? Do you feel like a lot of nurses understand trauma-informed care? Like, what is your view on that?
I feel like a lot of the younger nurses do, like a lot of people in my generation really do. And we are
Yeah.
like the champions of that. And we put a really big emphasis on it. And I think that it's shifting the culture. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like we all, at least where I work, do a really good job of educating our patients when we have the time. I think that like everywhere, it's probably a staffing thing, right? Like if you have
Yeah.
time to sit, sometimes I spend a long time, especially with a first time parent, like educating, just sitting in the room. If I have the time, I will just sit in the room the whole time and educate them. But sometimes you just don't have that. And I think that
Yeah.
I think we all understand the importance of it, but not all of us have the gift of time, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Or even the resources to be able to pass that along, right? Which time is a resource, but
Yeah,
that family probably didn't have
And
the resources to do it beforehand.
I
and
know.
ultimately, my question would be, is that the nurse's job, right?
Mm.
Like, in an ideal world, is that the role of the nurse?
It is because we have to actually document the education that we provide. Like
Oh,
it's part of it. Yeah. So, you know, we're not expected to give a full childbirth class like the whole time, but during your shift, you have to document some sort of education that happened and whether, you know, that
I
happens
didn't
or
know that.
not.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, but
that's
it is part of
fascinating.
our, yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
Actually, I
And
did
yeah.
know that the reason I know that is because I looked up how to become an IBCLC, and I found out most nurses become IBCLCs because they give their little bit of education on breastfeeding, and that counts towards their hours.
I didn't know that.
Cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they're
Your
on
girl's gonna
shift.
go look into that.
Go for it. But their time spent on their shift counts towards that hours and clinic hours. So
Fascinating. Yeah.
I did know that.
It's amazing.
You're right.
I didn't know
So
that's good
you
to
know,
hear. Yeah.
w-
Because that was my curiosity, if that's part of the job and if we have the right staffing and the right time, like, are you able to do that kind of thing? So one of the questions we got is about, which is what we hear all the time about, like, doulas not doing anything, right? So my question is, what do you think people mean when they say that? And do you think it has any merit, right? When people say, I've heard nurses say it, I've heard other people say it, oh, the doula didn't do anything.
Yeah, I think that probably popped up more when like COVID restrictions came into place and people wanted a birth photographer. And so birth photographers got their doula certifications.
Yeah.
And so, because that's been my experience, right? Like, I'm like, oh, your doula's here, but she's not squeezing your hips at all. She's just flashing her camera the whole time. She's sitting over there. Like, what are we doing? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not seeing any position changes with your camera in your hand.
I
That's,
also don't hear any pep talks or like
no,
her
very quiet.
doing their
I have
thing.
beef with doula togs, so I'm just gonna.
We got merch for you guys though. Doula Togs. Go to
I'm just gonna keep my
ringoffiremerch.com. But that is an interesting insight. And so in your opinion then, that it's a confusion of what that particular client wanted from their doula. Not necessarily that the doula didn't do anything, but they were hired for a different kind of job than what the expectation was off of the nurse.
Yeah, and I think that like as nurses, it's not really my job to be able to know whether that doula is doing what she was hired to do or not, because I don't know what happened in your prenatals. I don't know what your contract says. I don't know anything. I don't know if that client is not comfortable with somebody touching her physically that is not a healthcare professional, or her, partner or their partner. I don't know anything about that. So it doesn't really matter to me whether or not a doula or is not doing typical doula things.
Yeah.
It's like I'm just giving the same care as I would if a doula wasn't there. So I'm not sure what nurses are really looking for in terms of like, are they looking for somebody to do their job for them? Because it's our job also to like reposition our patients and to provide, comfort care as well as just medical care. I can, if I'm one-to-one with my patient, I could sit there and do hip squeezes too. I can do counter pressure. I can teach the partner how to do counter pressure too. I know those things, and I know that many nurses do know those things too, but I think it's laziness sometimes.
Do you also think there might be a bit of disappointment of like, yes, a doula is here. I'm gonna go sit down for a few minutes. I have 4 patients right now. It'll be real nice. It'll feel like 3. And then they come in and they're like,
A1 is screaming right now. You just had 4 patients. A1 is like, wait a minute.
No, but like I have multiple patients. Like now I can sit. I can only think about like one less. And then they go in and they're like, Stula's not doing fucking anything. Like I wanted to sit down and chill out, and they're not doing what I was hoping for. So
yeah.
I think that's actually, that's what I meant too, where I'm like, like if you're expecting the doula to take the reins and just like do all of the things that maybe you as a nurse should be doing, then, or would like to do but don't have time to do, then I could see the frustration of like, this doula is not doing anything. But
because that was always my question, is like, what do you want us to do? Like, because I know a lot of stuff happens when the nurse isn't in the room, or a lot of stuff happens prenatally. And I think a lot of that comes from this misunderstanding of how much work is done prenatally, right? Like, like the birth is the big event, but there's so much put into it prenatally. And we do know our clients, we do know if they want to be touched or if they don't, or right. Or if they were just hiring the doula for photography, but they had to say it's a doula so that they could get them in the room. Right. Like, which I think is a great point. because that they could totally just be there for photography, right? And the nurse doesn't know that. So that was always one of my questions too, because I heard it so much about like doulas not doing anything, or why did that person hire a doula if they were just going to do nothing, right? So it's just a very interesting, like, I don't know. I'm always like, what do you want from us?
I love that. No, I
You
think
didn't
that's a
hire
good
me, the
question.
client did. Why do you care
Yeah.
what I'm doing?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And I don't know. I honestly don't. I feel like that would be my thinking, is that you just expect the doula to do all these things and then you don't see it happening. So you just assume it's not happening. I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I feel like, but I think that that's probably it, where so much is happening beforehand. And when the nurse is not in the room, that it's easy for the nurse to be like, what the hell? They're not doing anything. Like, I just, but we
Or
can't know
maybe
that.
I'm pausing what I'm doing to give the nurse space to do their
Yeah,
job, right?
exactly.
That's often where I'm like, let me back up so you can do the things you need to do, and then I'll continue, right? Like
Yeah.
stuff like that.
And I think that, like, sometimes as nurses, we're used to seeing certain, like, we see some doulas very frequently, like they come and a lot of their clients deliver at our place, right? And so I think we see them doing, but that's one doula who has a certain way that she practices, and she's obviously going to attract clients who enjoy the things that she does for them. And maybe that is really active, like shaking the apple tree all the time. And, we're doing position changes every 15 minutes, and we're doing lunges, we're walking, we're doing the stairs, like,
Yeah.
maybe we're
Some
used to that.
want a
And so
personal trainer, some just want a pep talk, some just
Mhm.
want you to sit in the corner and just know that somebody's there for them, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's
I've
a
had
good
all
point of,
three, I've had some people be like, I'm not moving. Don't tell me to move. Cool, I won't.
oh, you're much nicer than me. I'm like, get your ass up.
I do the gentle suggestions. Do you want to try this one? Nope. Do you want to try this position? Nope. Do you want to try this position? Fine. One contraction, and they're like, nope, I'm going back. All right. You know your body.
That's fair. That's
so
definitely
much
fair.
nicer of a doula than me.
I'm not there to make people do things. I'm there
Oh.
to be the support, right?
Yeah, for sure. I just get, and I think it's because of like maybe the different kinds of clients, right? And this is where we go into like type. People are hiring me because they want a completely different experience. So I'm like, yo, you said you wanted a different experience. I know your story from last time. We could go with what you wanted from last time again, or you could listen and we try something completely different. What do you say?
You're so cute.
Because yeah, basically told me last time that it got all fucked up, so we could do it your way. No? All right. Again, like a difference on type of client though, right? So
yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and I think that, like, all doulas practice a little bit differently. And so I think if a nurse is really used to seeing a doula do it one way, then they don't realize that, oh, actually, like, there's a bunch of different ways to be a doula and to do it the right way. And there's more than one way to do the right thing. There's more than one right way to do something. So
how do you think we as doulas build that relationship with nurses? Like, we leave and that nurse is like, that was a good doula experience. I'm glad that person was here. Like, what do we as doulas do to improve that relationship, I guess, would be my question.
I feel like it's like, it's got to be on both ends, right? Like, I feel like it comes from the nurse too. But I think that, like I said, I really like it when doulas interact with me and will actually, like, speak to, you don't have to be like speaking for your client, but I think just like Emmy said, like, a friendly introduction goes a long way.
Yeah.
And if, and like, continuing to be yourself even when we're in the room, because sometimes we do spend a lot of time in a room if baby won't stay on the monitor, if we're doing frequent position changes that we need to adjust things, or we're titrating potential, like, keep being yourself. Like, don't dummy up just because we're in the room, you know what I mean? Don't, like, be afraid. Like, we're just people too. I think that, like, being respectful, and like, it's just, respect is one thing, but I think that making yourself othering yourself, like putting yourself in a corner, is just doing you a disservice, because you're part of the team. And I think, like, acting like you're part of the team from the second you walk in is going to help you, like, go a long way and earn some respect. You know what I mean? Like, earn some credit there. Yeah.
Well, and that's why I really truly look at myself as like on this, not the same as a partner, but I'm part of that birthers team. Like I'm not a medical person. I'm not like, so like I want to be treated that way, right? Like if you're not going to be a jerk to the partner, you probably shouldn't be a jerk to me kind of thing. And I do the like, I'm nice, I'm polite, I ask the questions, I try to get along with the nurses. If they don't like me, I don't really care. I think I hear a lot of doulas talk about being intimidated by nurses or like scared of nurses or like stuff like that. And I'm just like, why?
Well, I get it. I understand.
Like,
I feel like labor nurses are also some of like the scariest nurses ever because we are pretty like cutthroat and a little bit cliquey and a little bit like it's an intense place to be. And we are adrenaline junkies and we are just like, it's a completely different culture on that unit. So you're kind of like walking into, I understand, you're walking into like the bear's den. Like you're just like coming in to this, I'm sure you feel it. Like the nurses, like whenever anybody walks on the unit, we all whip our heads around like who's here. Like it's, at least on our unit, like we blare like metal, like we're blaring like hardcore rap. It's dark, like all the lights are off around the nurses station. Like we're little gremlins in there.
yeah.
But
All you've done is convince me that maybe I do want to be a labor and delivery nurse.
it's
Like that sounds
fun.
like fun.
It's fun, but
Um,
it's hardcore. So I understand the intimidation factor, but then it's like I am like a pretty nice person. So I feel like
our little
I
cinnamon roll
the
of
reason
Monica.
the reason why I said like why, and what I mean by that is like I totally get why it could be intimidating. Why are you a doula in a hospital? If you are uncomfortable or intimidated by nurses and providers, because those are all people going to be around, anesthesiologists, like all of these people are people that you are going to have to interact with. So kind of getting over that like fear, I think will help people be more successful as like doulas in hospitals at least.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that like you have to, as a doula, like know what your comfort zone is. Because if you're practicing outside of your comfort zone, that's something you have to deal with outside of that birth setting. And you
Yeah.
have to really be honest with yourself and be like, do I belong here in this? Like, do I really feel like I'm doing my client a favor by being like, do I feel like I'm doing her or them justice by being in this setting with them? Like, am I really practicing at my top level? Like, and if the answer is no, like you got to do some self-reflection outside of that, like work on what can I do to be more comfortable in that setting. And if the answer is nothing, then maybe we focus somewhere else because it is an intimidating place to be. But if you can't fight through that or figure out a way to maneuver that situation that doesn't have anything to do with the client or like alienating yourself from the healthcare team, then what are we doing?
Yeah.
I've ultimately always seen the healthcare team as my path to getting my client what they need. I've always seen it that way of like, oh, those are the people who hold the keys to the kingdom. They're the ones who are going to get the stuff that we need or like quickly or provide answers. So I've always like seen it that way. And maybe that's why I don't see it as intimidating, but more as like, oh, I should become friends with them because they have all the perks.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to look at it. I mean, not, I feel like, there's definitely like a power imbalance. I think that when like doulas walk in and the client walks in, it, it sucks that there's a power imbalance, but there just is, like you're in someone else's turf. You're not at home. You're not at a home birth. You're not at a birth center. You're in this like big corporation essentially. And all of these people have so much control. And at the end of the day, though, your client is the customer and we're all customer service reps. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, your client is gonna get what they want, but it just goes a lot smoother if we can talk about it nicely and with truth to it, not fear mongering and not,
Yeah.
alienating.
So if a doula was having a hard time with a nurse, what would be your recommendation? Like, specifically a nurse is like disrespecting their client or a nurse is, like disrespecting them. Like, what would be your suggestion? Like in the moment?
If it's really like a conflict with that nurse, then you can ask to talk to the charge nurse or ask who's in charge. Like, I need to touch them. Can we have a different nurse? That's always an option. You know what I mean? It's like the secret menu. I know that's like Emmy's favorite like
Yeah.
term, but it is like you can do what you got to do to get somebody else in there. You don't have to, suffer. There's
Yeah.
no reason. But because, like I said, your client is the customer. And if they're having a bad experience, they get to make a stink about it if they, and most of the time we'll oblige and we'll be like, yep, sure, we'll switch the assignment, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, as long as it's, a reasonable request and not like, we have to work together to find a compromise. But if it's really like a true conflict between the nurse and the patient, then, we figure something out. But
Yeah,
asking to see the charge nurse is a quick way to do that.
I've had to do that one. And it's never a fun conversation, especially because I come in super friendly and then seeing it deteriorate is not fun. And I had to do it in particular because this was someone going for a VBAC. They had educated themselves a ton on spinning babies. And the nurse kept trying to argue with the client that she didn't know what she was talking about, essentially. And that the nurse had been to so many spinning baby things and like was doing things incorrectly. And so finally my client, like when the nurse left, was like, she's got to go. It's like, can we send your husband up to say that? Because I've been real nice to her this whole time. And they were like, no, it has to be you. Because they didn't want to be that person. He literally did not want to leave the room to do it. So I went up and I had to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
That's
I've definitely
hard.
been in situations where I'm like, yeah, we need a different nurse. But I wait for my client to say that, right? Like I wait for my client to like express that, because I'm never going to be like, this nurse sucks. Right. So I usually wait for my client to say that.
Well, and that's just like what we were talking about, right? Where it's like if the nurse feels like the doula is like feeding the client or the patient like these things and it's all coming from the doula, then it feels very like us against you.
Yeah.
Whereas if the patient is also like, if you guys come in as a united front instead of like, us feeling like immediately there's this wall up and you're like whispering in your client's ear like while we're talking to them, that's a bad deal. But if it's like a united thing and if you can get the partner on board too, like if we're all kind of collaborating together, it feels a lot better than just like us saying something to the patient and then the doula going, you can say no the whole time. It feels very like bad. It's just bad vibes before I can even get the education out of my mouth. You can say no.
It is so funny that people will lead with that. You can say no.
Mm-hmm.
What does that sound like? That sounds like I'm wanting you to say no.
Right.
Right?
Well,
it's
you
not
were
like
much nicer than my mumbly comment.
it's not like, what are you thinking? Do you need more information? Like, let's walk you through brain, right? Let's ask those questions, right? You can say no. You can say no. Like, I've heard other doulas say that, and I'm like, you can't just say that. That is you telling them what, right? I have to be so like, I try to be so careful with that, right? I am not influencing your decision. I will help you ask the questions. I will help you talk it through, but I'm not going to say no. That's essentially what you're saying, right? You're not saying, oh, you can decline, or you can consent, or we can delay it, right? Those are the three choices, right? You're saying you can say no. So they know what the doula is thinking. Hate that one.
That's the thing. I think that's like the biggest red flag where it's like, oh my gosh, like they really are just against like they're just gonna, it just makes it bad. It just makes a bad situation. But yeah, that's I think the number one thing where I'm like, ooh, don't do that. Because immediately we're like, whoa, wait, what do you mean?
My last question was like, what's the worst thing a doula can do? And maybe you just answered it.
I think you did.
I feel like that is one of the, I feel like that's like number one. That's like the number one thing.
What is the number one thing doulas can do where you're like, oh my God, they did it. I'm so excited that this is the doula. It's like one thing. It doesn't have to be the top thing. Just one of the things where you're like, this one's quality.
Oh my gosh. I feel like when I hear them like talking about something that I bring up and they're like they say the correct information in an easy to understand, like in a way that I would also explain it, but I don't actually have to talk. I love that. I love that feeling where we're like, oh yes, okay. Like they know what they're talking about. You know what I mean? Because sometimes I'm like, I don't know the doula. I don't know where you got your education. Like, I don't know like where you got your info. So it's just kind of nice to like have peace of mind and be like, okay, the things that like they're telling my patient are accurate and true, and they're going to make a good decision based on like what this doula is telling them.
Yeah.
And I really
guys, Monica set the bar so low for y'all. Just be educated. She's like asking you to talk to her for you to be educated.
Give inaccurate information.
Like the bar is on the floor, which tells you the nurses really just want you there to do your thing. Like
be hands-on. Like when I go to like turn, like if she has an epidural or they have an epidural, we can turn them together. Like let's do it together. You know what I mean? Like if I'm doing something, look at my scrawny little arms. I need help. Like come help me. Like let's do it together. Like my wrist can't do like it.
Even the tiniest nurses, I'm like, how did you do that? You did that so easily.
I had one once tell me leverage. They were like, leverage.
Yes, I can do it. Do I want to do it by myself? No, let's do it together. Like, come on, like we can do it. Or like if you have an idea of positioning while I'm not in the room, you can just do it. And if the baby comes off the monitor, I'll just come in and fix it. Like it's fine. And I'll be like, oh, good, you're in a different position. That's beautiful. Great. I love it. Like,
yeah.
I think just being confident, like going in with some confidence and being a part of the team is incredible.
I love it.
I love all that. I guess like at this point, what can we plug for you, ma'am? What can you tell us about you so other people can follow you?
You can follow me I mean, if you want. I am not very I haven't been up to date with my socials for my business because
you've also been doing some stuff with your life. So you've been doing some things.
Yeah, you can follow me if you want. Opal Birthing Co on Instagram. My website is down because your girl has not updated it in a long time, but maybe someday we'll come back.
You'll be back. And I think it shows in your story, even those who are like, nah, I don't want to be in the birth world. Something always sucks you back in and puts you back where you belong. And it sounds like you've always had this calling. So Opal Birthing Co.
I mean, you were making your mom give birth, which I think is so cute.
Yeah. That's a good mommy. So that's a good mommy. Yeah.
She's like, all right.
Maybe Monica ends up as a cool midwife,
Oh, girl. If you do it, I'm sending you everyone. I'm sending you all the IBCLC and midwife. Here we come. Like
once my student loans get forgiven from my bachelor's degree. No, I'm just kidding. Oh my gosh. Just take out more.
All right. Writing a letter to Biden right now.
Great.
Well, I appreciate you so much on this talk and telling us your insights, especially in the way that you did it. I think helps break down that barrier that it's nurses and doula, that it can be both or it can be neither. And so that's pretty rad.
Yeah, it's awesome. Been really fun.
Yay. Yeah. Thanks for listening. Buy our merch.
Join our Discord.
If you join our Discord, there is we streamed and watched and commented on the entire movie Doula that came out recently. Gotta watch it. It's
a journey.
Wild.
It's a trip.
It is a journey.
It's a good time.
But you can only get that on our Discord. Go. Join it. I think that's it. I already said buy our merch.
Yeah, buy our fucking merch.
We love you and thanks for listening. And I'm Alex Barr, Educator.
I'm Emmy the Birth Wizard, and I'm proud of you.
I'm Monica, the labor nurse. And I'm proud of you too.
And until next time, Bye.
Bye.